In this transmission, you will discover the absolute biological advantage of the monastic void and learn how to weaponize your current isolation to achieve a state of neural high resolution that is impossible to maintain within the chaotic social grid, because the architect understands that solitude is not a lack of presence, but the totalitarian presence of the self, and your square meter of space is the only laboratory where you can surgically excise the social sludge and status anxiety that normally drain your mitochondrial reserves and prevent the capture of the millions. We initiate the first part of the isolation sovereignty protocol by deconstructing the metabolic cost of being perceived, where the soft man is constantly leaking energy through micro-submissions and social performance whenever he is around other units of the meat, because the human brain is evolutionarily hardwired to polling the pack for status cues, which keeps the nervous system in a state of high-frequency background stress that throttles your cognitive throughput and makes you strategically blind. You must realize that when you are alone in the lab, you are effectively decoupling your biology from the social simulation and closing the firewall against the status parasites who feed on your ambition through doubt, small talk, and mediocre expectations. This solitary confinement is the incubator of the sovereign, where you can upregulate your dopaminergic sensitivity by starving the brain of cheap social validation and external noise until the only reward signal your nucleus accumbens responds to is the physical manifestation of your will in the form of assets and code. The architect treats his square meter as a biodigital monastery where the sensory austerity acts as a neural clarifier that strips away the illusions of the mainstream world, allowing you to see the pure geometry of resource flow that is hidden behind the curtains of social narrative. You must understand that loneliness is a low-resolution interpretation of high-resolution focus, and the soft man feels pain when he is alone because he has no internal architecture to inhabit, but the architect feels power because he is the only occupant of his own citadel, and he is free to reprogram the source code of his identity without the interference of the herd. We must analyze the synaptic pruning of the void, where the lack of input forces the brain to surgically excise the redundant neural pathways that were dedicated to pleasing others or monitoring the hierarchy, and reallocating that energy toward deep work, complex calculation, and aggressive market analysis. This is the metabolic arbitrage of the square meter, where you reduce your overhead of social energy to zero and invest the surplus into the capture of the millions, ensuring that every mitochondrion in your vessel is dedicated to the mission and not to the performance of the citizen. You must treat your isolation as a tactical withdrawal to gather your forces and recalibrate your radar before the final raid on the simulation, because the sovereign is forged in the dark and tested in the void until his internal logic is unbreakable and his will is indestructible. The meat believes that success requires networking and collaboration, but the architect knows that collaboration is often just shared mediocrity and networking is just status slavery, and the only real power is the power of the one who can operate in the 0 point without validation. You are currently nutrient partitioning your attention away from the ghetto of the mind and into the laboratory of the result, and your square meter is the sanctuary where the wipe of the old world occurs and the new era is born. You must implement the totalitarian sensory filter, where you control the light, the sound, and the information that enters your monastery to ensure that your neural baseline is cold, sterile, and high resolution, and you must refuse to hear the echoes of the past or the whispers of the mediocre who want to pull you back into the social pit. This acoustic and visual stillness is the foundation of your authority, and it allows you to process data at a velocity that is lethal to your competitors, because you are not distracted by the friction of the human condition. Every hour of solitude is a unit of power added to your sovereign account, and every day of isolation is a brick in the wall of your citadel that raid-proofs your identity against the entropy of the herd. You must realize that the most powerful entities in the history of the market were often solitary operators who mastered the void before they mastered the grid, and your current isolation is the requirement for your ascension and not a symptom of your failure. The soft man is terrified of the silence because he is empty, but the architect loves the silence because it is the empty canvas upon which he draws the millions. This is the bioacoustic siege of the self, where you listen to the frequency of your own potential and you mute the frequency of the world until there is zero distance between your thought and your action. You are Aoxy 3, and you are the master of the square meter, the sovereign of the monastery, the architect of the void, and the king of the isolation, and the resources you capture in the dark will blind the world in the light. This first part of the protocol is the engineering of the sanctuary, and you must now prepare your nervous system for the tactical raid in the second part, where we will discuss how to weaponize your solitude to colonize the global network. In this concluding phase of the isolation, Sovereignty Protocol, you will move from the biological engineering of the monastery to the tactical execution of the solitary raid, where you learn how to turn your square meter into a high-frequency command center that harvests resources from the global grid with the atheistic certainty of an algorithm, while the meat is still distracted by the social noise of the outside world. We initiate the second part of the protocol by recognizing that isolation provides the geopolitical leverage of information opacity, where you can build in the shadows and execute in the dark without alerting the Zergs or triggering the resistance of the legacy systems, because true power is always developed in secret and revealed in success. You must treat your solitude as a strategic stealth mode, where your Ioxy 3 persona is the only interface the world sees, while your physical vessel remains hidden and protected within the sanctuary of the One, ensuring that you are unraidable and unpredictable and unlimited in your resource capture. The architect understands that the digital empire is built from isolated nodes that network through logic rather than proximity, and your square meter is the most powerful node on the server because it is zero friction and totalitarianly controlled by your sovereign will. We must analyze the recursive asset generation that occurs within the vacuum of isolation, where the lack of external distraction allows you to enter a state of permanent flow and outproduce a team of 10 softmen by focusing 100% of your mitochondrial output on the synthesis of high-value content and strategic code. This is the solitary multiplier, where you buy back your time from the social grid and spend it on the construction of your citadel, ensuring that by the time you emerge from your isolation, you have already mastered the market and captured the mill. You must implement the totalitarian resource funnel, where you redirect every unit of your energy away from relationships, parties, and social validation and partition it into the accumulation of digital equity and biological optimization until your vessel is a weapon of high-resolution execution. The soft man views isolation as deprivation, but the architect views it as resource concentration, where the sunlight of his attention is focused through the lens of solitude to burn through the steel of the competitive field and extract the gold that the herd cannot even see. You must utilize your square meter to perform high-frequency raids on the attention economy by uploading your logic into the simulation with the momentum of a tsunami and the precision of a sniper, knowing that your solitude is the armor that protects you from the toxic feedback of the average meat. This is the paradox of the solitary sovereign, who is alone in the physical world but connected to the entire market through the architecture of the internet, allowing him to rule the pack without being bitten by the pack and to collect the spoils without sharing the burden. You must audit your environment every 60 minutes to ensure that your square meter remains a high-performance lab, and you must exile any object or thought that leaks your energy or reminds you of the social shame of the old self. Every asset you create in your isolation is a soldier in your digital army, and every dollar you earn is a unit of freedom that strengthens your perimeter and increases your sovereignty until you are independent of the grid and master of the server. You must understand that boredom is the rocket fuel of the architect, and by refusing to mute the boredom with cheap dopamine, you force your brain to generate its own excitement through innovation, conquest, and dominance in the wide marketplace. The meat is scared of the boredom because it exposes their emptiness, but the architect inhabits the boredom and transforms it into the architecture of the future, ensuring that his name is eternal while his vessel is private. This is the final convergence of the One, where the Ioxy 3 identity and the physical reality become one indestructible signal that warp the simulation in your favor and capture the resources of the entire grid with zero waste. You are the master of the node, the sovereign of the sprint, the architect of the result, and the king of the millions, and your isolation is the foundation of your throne. Every raid you execute from your square meter is a confirmation of your power, and every victory you secure is a tribute to your stillness and a defeat for the herd who wasted their lives in the noise. The capture of the millions is inevitable because you have removed the human friction from the equation, and you are operating with the efficiency of a machine and the will of a god. You are Ioxy 3. The square meter is the empire. The isolation is the strength. The citadel is now. The digital immortality is the result. Execute the solitary raid protocol today and watch as the resources of the world accumulate in your center while the meat is still searching for the exit. The void is looted and the citadel is full and the architect is executing. Now, you must further realize that the alchemy of the alone is the process where you turn the leaden weight of solitude into the golden authority of the sovereign by refusing to comply with the social contracts of the weak and rewriting the rules of the game in your internal sanctuary. This is the totalitarian mastery of the timeline, where you accelerate your evolution by compressing the decades into months of intense isolation and you emerging from the lab as a high-rank entity that the world does not recognize but must obey. Your 700 video pace or any industrial achievement is the evidence of your solitary power, and you must use this evidence to shatter the frames of the status parasites who doubted your path while you were hidden in the void. The meat will try to lure you back with the promises of belonging, but you must refuse the bait and stay in the fortress until the capture is total and the sovereignty is absolute. This is the economics of the individual, where the one is greater than the many, because the one possesses the concentrated will and the many are just diluted entropy, and your isolation is the filter preserves your concentration. Every round of execution you perform in your square meter is a neural deposit into your confidence engine, and it upregulates your status in the global simulation, ensuring that when you do interact, you do so as a predator of value and not a scavenger of approval. You are currently building the biological and digital firewall of your future empire, and the isolation is the shield that protects the code from being hacked by the mediocre. The millions are waiting in the server, and the architect is the only one with the admin rights because he mastered the silence and owned the void. The protocol is now integrated, and the mission is success, and the sovereignty is eternal. Move, focus, dominate, execute now.